Welcome to Decide to Transform. You made it to level 2, deeper questions leading to deeper answers. I'm Tomas Garza, and I'm here to help you decide to transform. I'll be setting the pace for the process to support your unfolding. Learn and commit to a practice that brings simplicity and awareness of what is ready to be released. Join me now and allow the experience of a deeper sense of love. Welcome everyone all over the world to Decide to Transform. I am your host, Tomas Garza, and I'm happy to have you joining me today, wherever you're from. I just did a Facebook Live not too long ago, and there were people jumping on from all over the world, so I hope you're listening right here today. This is Decide to Transform. If you've never caught the show before, I love to go deep with personal growth, personal transformation, and spirituality, and the intersection of the three. It's where everything comes into play. And we've got a great show on tap for you today. And stick around for the entire show because I have a very special announcement that I will share with you later. I am deliberately holding this off, but I will share a special announcement about my next guest, which is next week, and the show airs on Om Times Radio every Tuesday at 1 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time and 10 a.m. Pacific, if you're on the West Coast in North America. Now, today, we're talking about loving yourself and self-love. The title of the show today is Commit to Loving Yourself. So, as you can imagine, we will be talking about what self-love looks like, also what life is like when you don't have it. And this has been a real theme. It's been a real theme over the last month here on the show. If you have tuned in live or listened to any of the replays, anything over the last month, you'll know that we've been really going deep and talking about our relationship to ourselves. We have talked about self-care and the importance of self-care. This was a show from 2 weeks ago, and if you haven't heard it, I recommend that you go back and listen to it again. I take you for a virtual walk on the beach in Mexico, which has been, over the past year, one of my go-to self-care rituals. Also, we've talked about self-talk and self-talk transformation and how we take our negative mind chatter, things that do not serve us, statements that we may make in our mind that hold us back and keep us stuck, that keep us small and playing small and little and frustrated and unsatisfied, and turn those around into statements that serve us, that empower us and give us fuel for the next phase in our transformation, because it is most certainly a process. And last week I had my very good friend and fellow Om Times radio show host Lisa Berry on, and that was last week for Self-Talk Transformation. You can go back and listen to that very high energy show, and she shares a lot of her techniques and tips that have worked for her in her life on transforming her self-talk and taking negative and unhelpful mind chatter, turning that around. So all of that plays into the theme of today's show, which is Commit to Loving Yourself. This is all about self-love. And again, I will have a special announcement later on in the broadcast about next week's special guest. I have had a couple of guest teachers here on the show. Actually, one who's appeared twice. Lisa has been on the show 2 times. And I've got a very special guest teacher next week. So you'll want to stay tuned for that announcement and more. Now let's get into then the subject of self-love and what exactly it is that we're talking about here. So this is something that may make sense to you as a listener, and it may not. For any number of reasons, we all have a different perspective on this because we've all had a different upbringing. And we've had different family members and been raised in different cultures, had different teachers, and self-care and self-love means something entirely different to all of us. Now, in my experience as a professional in a number of different arenas, as a teacher, an instructor, as a former college professor, as a former mediator, and as a facilitator, even currently, I run across people all the time that have difficulty lavishing themselves. They have difficulty for any number of reasons showering themselves with the same respect and love and positive energy that they may give routinely to other people. And it doesn't matter what profession you're in, although if you are in a caregiving profession, this is going to be extremely pertinent to you because how you show up in the world really matters. And it's true no matter what our spiritual background or our spiritual tradition, it's true 100% of the time that if your own cup is empty, you won't be able to give fully to anyone else. Which makes sense. How can you pour from an empty cup or a cup that is broken and needs to be mended or healed? That's one way to look at what healing practice is allowing us to love ourselves so that we can then extend that love to other people, to the world around us, really to all living things. Because certainly this applies to animals as well as human beings. So take whatever and whoever is important in your life today, if you're listening, and apply that to your own life. So there are really two things that I want to talk about today that are involved in the concept of self-love. And one we addressed on the show a couple of weeks ago, and that is our own self-care. Now, we talked about the fact that self-care is different for everybody and what people do to, frankly, be nice to themselves, to honor themselves and recharge their batteries can vary. You can go to the gym if you're someone that loves to go to the gym. You can go for hikes. If you're not into anything athletic, that can actually be taking time out for yourself and watching Netflix if that's what does it for you. Really, this can be anything that you want to do, that you can commit to, that will help you recharge your batteries, so to speak, to fill your own cup so that when you're interacting in the world, and even if you're doing it online, our energy still comes across. It doesn't come across the same way, of course, as if we're interacting with someone live and in person, but it still, nevertheless, is transmitted and received. Now, how you show up matters. It matters how you care for yourself. So that's one aspect of self-love is self-care. And the other that we're going to talk about in further detail here today on the show is self-respect. And what I'm talking about is caring enough about yourself and valuing yourself, honoring yourself enough to do things that consistently serve you. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I mean possibly, for example, setting healthy boundaries. In fact, I do mean that because that's critically important. How many of us have learned in a painful relationship that it is very necessary, highly necessary to set healthy boundaries so that we are not abused, for example, so that people do not run all over us, so we're not used financially in terms of emotional support, in terms of physical support and caregiving, so that people don't take advantage of what might be our loving, giving, caring nature. So yes, give, but give to yourself as well. Self-care and self-respect are very critical, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So while we're on the subject of something like healthy boundaries in a relationship, in a job setting, anywhere in life, the question that is very helpful for us to address with ourselves is what happens when you don't have self-love? What happens when you really don't value yourself and have a high standard for how you treat yourself and how other people treat you? Well, as you might imagine, in a relationship context, this means that you may attract people that take advantage of that. You may attract people that abuse you. And if you grew up in situations where your parents fought constantly, yeah, you may relate to that. Many of you may relate to that. Then as adults, what happens is we tend to recreate that pattern because as kids, we form subconscious programs. I mean, really, they're kind of formed for us at a young age. At a very young age, we absorb all kinds of information, and then our minds become programmed, really, with what we've learned growing up. And if you learned abuse, what's going to happen? You attract abuse until such time as you're able to change your internal programming. So without changing that internal program, it's much like a computer program. If that helps you to analogize it and view it that way, then view it that way, because there's no outward change or transformation if the internal program stays the same, because you'll keep seeking what the internal program wants you to seek. Right? Automatically. So if you don't love yourself, you could end up in bad relationships. And possibly, quite possibly, for some of you, that could well be a string of bad relationships. It could be a habit. Have you ever found yourself, the question that you can ask yourself, saying, gosh, I always seem to attract the same kind of person. I always attract the same kind of, well, maybe jerk. You can use another word for jerk if you want to. I'm not going to use that on the air, but you're more than welcome to do that. I've heard people say this, and I will share with you that for 13 years, I was directly involved in a lot of that as a family mediator. Maybe you've had mediation in the past in that context. You'll know that it's very intense and that it doesn't bring out the best in anyone. And otherwise, really good, really wonderful people can have really stressful, traumatic experiences. So if you don't love yourself, you may attract a bad relationship. Now, what about at work? You may be in a place where you find yourself stuck in a no-end job where you know that your employers perhaps don't value you, or if you're an entrepreneur and you're feeling like you're stuck and not necessarily getting anywhere, maybe you're not doing something that's aligned with who you really are and your own purpose, your own mission and why you're here. And perhaps you might find that you need to get clear on that. And there are plenty of coaches that are excellent at helping you with that. That's not really the subject of today's show, but you can find yourself in bad relationships, in unserving, unfulfilling work situations, just feeling stuck. And even in your physical health, you can find yourself feeling stuck. If you want to lose weight, but it never seems to come off, or you want to gain strength, physical strength, but it never seems to happen. Well, are you committing to loving yourself? So if you don't love yourself, obviously the consequences to you can be very grave. If you have found yourself in a situation where you always put yourself last, well, your physical health can suffer. If it's not a weight loss or a physical strength issue for you, it could be mental, such as depression. It could be a continuing stream of illnesses. If your immune system is constantly depressed, then you may get sick a lot. You may even develop chronic illnesses. Who knows? bad relationships, jobs. There's always a consequence to yourself. And what we need to think about here as human beings is we need to think about also the consequences to others of not loving ourselves. I always come back to this, but it's a very, very good example. Let's consider the situation of a parent. Many of you, I know, have children. And if you don't, then, take from this what you need to take and apply it to the people that you're close to in your life. If a parent doesn't commit to loving themselves, they transmit a message, even subconsciously, to their kids that they're not worth loving. You're not worth loving. I'm not worth loving is the message that you send. And it's received. Any message that we send, always, this is true no matter what your background or belief system, if we send a message to someone, even subconsciously, they always receive it. It doesn't mean that they accept the message, and in fact, your kids could rebel against you 100%. Maybe you rebelled against your parents and your upbringing 100%. But again, I'm just using the parental situation as an example of consequence to others. Think about it. If you don't love yourself, you radiate that out to the world, to people that you work with, to friends, neighbors, family members, and nobody wants to be seen as consistently grouchy, as mean, as unapproachable. And we may toss that around from time to time, jokingly, maybe, as a badge of honor. People might say, oh, I'm just a curmudgeonly old man, or I'm just a curmudgeonly old lady. But really, nobody really wants to be seen that way. And if you don't love yourself, you're risking being seen that way, because we all transmit messages to one another. In fact, whether you hold yourself out as a teacher or not, you are always, always teaching, no matter what. We're all energetic and vibrational, and what you send out there, you get back. So, after the break, we're going to talk about making a commitment to loving yourself and some things, practical things that you can do to overcome the obstacles to that. So stick around. You're listening to Decide to Transform on Om Times Radio.
Connecting you with the best of the conscious minds in the world. Om Times Radio. IOM FM.
Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organisation, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. Om Times, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hi, I'm Tomas Garza, author of Decide and host of Decide to Transform on Om Times Radio. I want to ask you, if you want something in life, have you decided on it? If not, you'll listen to a limiting story about yourself. You will say you can't, you're too old, too young, etc. Decide to transform in life. Learn what you can choose to believe instead of your limiting stories. Decide. Available now in paperback and ebook.
Did you know that you have the power to change anything in your life? Did you know you can do so even with the things that you've already decided are impossible to change? Come join me, Venus Castleberg, on Outside the Impossible as I interview people from around the globe that have literally changed the things they thought were impossible to change just by using the amazing tools of Access Consciousness. Now airing Wednesdays 4 p.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific. Do you dare to believe that anything really is possible?
opiates has taken everything and everyone I've ever loved away from me. Everything.
I blew my ankle out and I got prescribed pain pills by my doctor.
If making my detox public is going to help somebody, I'm all for it. I just wish I would have had a warning.
Opioid dependence can happen after just 5 days. Know the truth, spread the truth. A message from Truth, the Ad Council, and ONDCP.
Welcome back, everyone, wherever you're listening from around the world. You are listening to Decide to Transform on Om Times Radio, and I'm your host, Tomas Garza. We're right in the middle of a very hard-hitting and very interesting show about committing to loving yourself and self-love. And during this segment of the show, we're going to hear from one of you all, the listener, with a really wonderful, hard-hitting listener question. So you'll want to stick around for that. Before the break, we were looking at the question, the overarching question of what happens when you do not commit to loving yourself. And we looked at some of the answers in terms of what happens to you personally, and what happens to others. And all kinds of consequences are possible. And I will share with you one example from my own life. It's a very long story that I won't go into the full detail of right here. But I did mention before the break that I spent 13 years in the alternative dispute resolution field, in the conflict resolution field, as a mediation instructor. Now, this is a wonderful service that people can provide, men and women all over the world, bringing parties in dispute together to amicably, hopefully, right, settle their differences outside of court, saving themselves all kinds of headache and time and money, financial expenses, maybe attorney fees, that sort of thing, and giving the parties themselves actual control over the process and over what's going to happen in their own lives. And if children are involved, if this is a custody dispute or something like that, as it often was for me, then this is their life too, and having control over all of that, it's what people want. And people end up going to court when they cannot make an agreement, obviously. But in the context of self-love, for me, for many years before I finally quit, and I did this at the end of 2013, I was not happy in the job. For several years, I just kept going and found myself questioning why I was doing it. I did. I found myself questioning why I continued to put myself in a negative situation, quite honestly, because a divorce, a custody dispute it's very difficult if you've ever been through one. I've been through one. I can attest to this. It's very, very difficult. It's emotionally troubling. That's maybe the PG version of that. You could obviously say a lot more that really you can imagine what it's like if you've never been through it. Maybe you know people who have. And it's even more intense and it's even more high stakes when your own children are involved. So I put myself deliberately in a position 4 to 5 times a day. I had lots of appointments, very busy, and successfully settled a number of the cases. And this it was a situation where it just became draining and toxic for me. And I found myself seeking vacations more often. I found myself dreaming of tropical beaches more often and lounging in a lounge chair under a palm tree where I could really detox and de-stress. To me, that's de-stressing. For some of you, that might be going skiing. So you never know. Whatever's de-stressing for you, that's de-stressing to me. And I found myself thinking about that time and again. And yet I kept going back. Why? The paycheck. right? The regularity of the paycheck and the regularity of the referral source. In this case, a state court would send me clients all the time without my having to do anything. So, yes, gravy train contract, decent paying, and it's very easy to stay in that situation for that reason. But the self-love piece was missing for me, because if I had had that to a greater degree, I would have gotten out and away from the situation much sooner. Much, much sooner. And I didn't, for all kinds of reasons, but the money was one reason, the regularity of everything was another. And what I was lacking was something that I really want to share with you, and that I was lacking a real, deep down, honest to God level choice, a decision. That's what I was lacking. And you know that the show is entitled Decide to Transform. My book is entitled Decide. All of this for a reason, because without making a decision to change, to grow, and to transform positively, then we're just going through the motions. I always use the example, I often do, of someone that wants to get healthy and go to the gym. And if you don't really decide to do it, then you're just kind of dabbling. And this applies to anything in life. People often say how much they want to do something, but unless you decide really deep down to do that, then the action is not going to be sustainable. You may go to the gym for a couple of weeks and then give it up for whatever reason. A decision will help make those kind of internal programmatic changes in our own mind. And I was lacking that. Now, I was lacking that. Also, the next level is committing, making a commitment. The title of this show is Commit to Loving Yourself. Commit to a practice of doing this. Commit to a practice of change. What does that mean? It depends on what you want to do. But without a decision to leave a toxic work environment behind, I stayed in it. I didn't have a commitment to change or to do anything else. And that is one example. So what we do is when we decide that we've had enough, we can then commit to a practice, whatever that is, and then revisit it time and again until it becomes habit, which can take anywhere up to 66 days on the average to have a new practice, a new action, a new belief, a new statement, possibly. This could be a new hand-on-heart affirmation, whatever it is for you. It takes a while for it to become habit. You have to consistently and persistently work on that. And what happens all the time, there are many, many obstacles to self-love, and what we need to do, all of us as human beings, this is what I needed to do years ago, was to start addressing it. I needed to start addressing all of these obstacles to self-love. And one of those was something that I want to spend a couple minutes talking about here, was my own negative self-talk. And I would tell myself, no, it's not the time to get out of this. No, you're not ready. I would say these things to myself after a really particularly hard-hitting session, and I won't share any of the details of this to protect confidentiality of my former clients, but you can imagine some of the things that people argue about and fight about when they're in the midst of a divorce or separation and their kids are involved, money is involved, cherished possessions are involved. It could be that pets are involved. There are all kinds of things that would come up and all kinds of behaviors that I heard that I would absolutely care never to repeat again in this lifetime, because I often had the experience, guys, of thinking when I would go in to an appointment that, I would think, gosh, I've heard it all. And every time I said that to myself, something new would come up and I would realize, gosh, I really have not heard it all. And how often is that true in our lives? Just when you think you've seen it all, heard it all, something else comes up and you realize, gosh, I did not see that coming. And that would happen to me on a daily basis. So until I made a decision, the self-talk was not positive for me. It was, it's just not the right time, or a change in career is just not for me. Right? Sometimes I would even tell myself, I can't do that right now. I can't. That is a negative self-talk. And this is something that we can and should all turn around. That was what I needed to do, was to begin to change my own self-talk. That was an obstacle to self-love. Other common obstacles, in addition to your self-talk, could be a sense of worthiness. And I know that I'm speaking to a number of you, wherever you're listening in the world. I know that I'm speaking to you right now. We don't often feel worthy of loving ourselves. We do not feel, for whatever reason or reasons, that we deserve it. Now, why is that? Well, any number of reasons, but if you find yourself in that situation, you do deserve it. And in order to be the strongest person that you can be, you most absolutely need, it's very critical to begin to commit to loving yourself and a practice of that. Worthiness, very common obstacle. Also, feeling selfish. This is a big one. People often feel selfish for loving themselves. Now, why do you suppose that is? Well, we're told as kids, share, right? When we're on the playground playing with other kids, we're told to share our toys, share time with things, share this toy, share that toy, right? I don't know. Modernly, it could be share screen time, whatever it is. We're told to share and we're told to give. And of course, giving is wonderful and it's fulfilling and just, it's uplifting. It's wonderful to be in service, but we have to take time out for ourselves. Here's the rub, is that often people feel that that's very selfish. Now, this particular issue, I know, speaks to a number of you in the world because you have told me about it. In whatever context we have met, this has come up, and you have told me. If I've never met you, if it's coming up for you, you'll really want to pay attention to this listener question that's coming up right now. So I want to say a couple of things about this, guys, is that I welcome your questions here on the show. Every week I like to take at least one question from a listener, and we've had up to 3 on the show at any one time before. I love to get these because they tend to be wonderful, hard-hitting, real-life dilemmas that someone needs help with. And I will read the question on the air and answer it, and take as much time as it requires to go through it thoroughly. And if it's hard-hitting, it's hard-hitting. But I love to hear from you all. Now, the best way, if we're connected on Facebook, is to send me a message on Facebook Messenger. Now, if we are not, then my email address is tomas@tomasgarza.com, and that's Tomas. There is no H. This is indeed the Spanish variety, Tomas@tomasgarza.com. Feel free to write me an email with your hard-hitting question. And I want to encourage you to do this because when people do this, I've got something free that my friend and colleague, business partner, and I want to give away to you. Lisa Berry, who was on the show with me last week and also on January 7th, and I have developed a self-talk transformation call. It's a 15-minute phone call where you can ask a personal burning question about your self-talk. If you could change, in other words, one thing about what you tell yourselves, what would that be? If it's I'm too old, I'm too young, or I go over things in the past all of the time. How do I handle that? What we can do for you in a 15-minute call is turn that around, give you a new uplifting and serving statement, self-loving statement, and give you also a practice, something positive and accessible and feasible that you can do to help anchor that statement in your life. And on a 15-minute call, we can do that for you. We offer this. This is a $79 value, US dollars, guys. And if you write into the show with questions, right now we're giving that to you absolutely free. So not only will you get answers to your questions on the air, you will really be serving and lifting up countless people all over the world who have the same question as you are. Plus, you get to spend 15 minutes with us, and it's high energy, it's high power. Go back and catch Lisa on the show. She is dynamic and full of energy and is an expert at turning around negative mind chatter. And I'll help you with anchoring that new statement with a practice that you can do in your life. So that's going to be absolutely free if you write in, guys, to the show. Okay, so the next listener question is going to be very, very hard hitting. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut away to a commercial a little bit early here, so I have time to answer this really hard hitting question more thoroughly. We will do that after the break. You're listening to Decide to Transform right here on Om Times Radio. Stick around.
Free your mind with Om Times Radio, IOM FM.
Ascending Hearts is no ordinary dating site, but a spiritual dating site with a purpose, to link you with your soulmate. We engineer the serendipity so you can trust that you will attune with someone that has the same matching vibration as you. Ascending Hearts, the conscious dating site for the spiritually aware. Try Ascending Hearts for free, ascendinghearts.com.
Hi, I'm Tomas Garza, host of Decide to Transform on Om Times Radio. Thank you for listening. You know, there's only so much we can cover on a 1-hour show. If you'd like to hear further from me, I happily offer personalized teachings. Get your very own voice recording or book a one-on-one consultation. Ask a burning question and gain clarity on achieving massive transformation in your life. Details available on my website, tomasgarza.com.
My name is Victor Furman. Some call me The Voice. I've always been fascinated with human nature, spirituality, science, and the crossroads at which they meet. Join me Wednesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern on Om Times Radio, and we'll explore these topics and so much more on Destination Unlimited.
I'm Fidel Nshambo. I was born in a city called the Bukavu in the Congo. We were a loving family, and then, boom, everything that I had disappeared in a single day. People think that when you are a refugee and they resettle you to America and all your problems are done. They don't understand that that's the beginning of everything. I was not born a refugee. I was made one.
It's time we welcome refugee families with open arms. Learn more at embracerefugees.org, brought to you by the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Decide to Transform. I'm Tomas Garza, your host, and you're listening to Commit to Loving Yourself, a show all about and devoted to self-love. Now, right before the break, I promised you a really wonderful, hard-hitting listener question. So let's get right into that. you know, and you can go back and listen if you're just joining me, about how you can get your question on the air and get a free self-talk transformation session with Lisa Berry and myself. So I encourage you to go back and hear that right before the first commercial break, or the second commercial break here today. So let's jump right into this, because it has everything to do with the obstacle of selfishness as one of three main obstacles to self-love. One being self-talk, negative self-talk. 2, worthiness, the sense of not feeling worthy. And 3, selfishness. So this question is from my wife, in fact, who wished to be identified on the show today, Cindy Garza from Mérida, Yucatan, which is where we're currently living. And she writes, I'll tell you more about Cindy personally in just a couple of minutes. Let's get to the question. Cindy says, people think that being selfish is wrong. It's been drilled into us. What are some things that we can do to shift that way of thinking and to really start practicing self-care and self-love? I'll read the question again. People think that being selfish is wrong. It has been drilled into us. What are some things that we can do to shift that way of thinking and start really practicing self-love and self-care? All right. So thank you very much to my lovely wife for reading this question. Again, more about her in just a couple of minutes. But my very first hit on this is, yes, we're taught that being selfish is wrong. We talked about this earlier on the broadcast, share your toys. As a kid, you may have heard this repeatedly from your parent, share your toys. From the teachers, share, be nice, play with each other nicely on the playground. So, yes, being selfish has been drilled into us as wrong and inappropriate. And what we can do is just realize that some of the things that we all do every day are self-love. So this is one of the obstacles to practicing and committing to a practice of loving yourself on a deep level, is that we feel that we're being selfish when we're doing it. Some of the things that people do every day actually are loving themselves. A coffee break could be an act of self-love, especially if it helps you de-stress. A walk on your lunch break at work, if you have a lunch break at work, if that's the situation that you have. Maybe it's getting a 15-minute break and getting some fresh air and popping outside where you can see the clouds and see a tree. Could be that. Whatever it is for you, some of the little things that you do every day actually are acts of self-love. They actually are self-love in practice. Grow with that. And I invite you to notice these things, to pay attention to these things, and cultivate them. Because I'm willing to bet that you're already doing more in terms of self-love than you give yourself credit for. I'm sure that's the case for many of you. That all of these little things that you may not even think about during the day are in fact acts of taking care of yourself, which is a form, as we saw, of self-love. Self-respect is another, as in setting healthy boundaries, which is a whole completely different show in and of itself. That's a topic that people, professional psychologists and other people, podcast hosts, authors, can talk about at length. There are a number of 400 to 500 page books just about this issue, but that's an example. So a lot of these little things can be noticed and cultivated. And what I would say is, don't judge it, just do it and ask this question. So how else can I do this? How else can I love myself? How can I grow this and expand it? Let's say that it is a 15-minute break at work. Well, all right, you may not be able to expand that break in a work environment, but what else can you do to expand that feeling of relief, right, of release of pressure, if it's that for you, of calm. Maybe this is your opportunity to take a deep breath free of electronics. For example, if you're glued to a computer screen all day, or if you have a telephone attached to you all the time, maybe this is your opportunity to unplug. It's an act of self-love. Now, how do you feel in that situation? And ask yourself, how else can I do this? How can I grow with this? And how can I expand it? In other words, where else in my life can I practice this? What is the feeling that you get into when you take that break and unplug? Do you feel calmer? Do you feel less stressed? For example, do you feel a release of tension and pressure? And if you do, then whatever it is you're doing that causes you to feel that release of tension and pressure is nothing other than an act of self-love. It lifts us up to de-stress ourselves. And a tranquil mind is not a small gift. That is something that's said in A Course in Miracles. It's a direct quote. A tranquil mind is not a small gift. It may feel small to you, but how does it feel when you're tranquil? Right? How does it feel when you take a little bit of time, even 30 seconds, to chill out and get away from a situation that's stressful to you? So the question then becomes, what else can you do to grow with that situation and expand it? Is there something else, however small, that you can do to get yourself back into that feeling, to recreate that feeling? That's the question. And that's the examination, because it's not selfish. You may find yourself in a situation where you in fact are a caregiver professionally. You could be a professional nurse or professionally in a caregiver situation where that's actually your job. So what can you do to focus that caregiving energy on yourself so that you can show up in a different place? Because this is ultimately all about how we show up in the world. And are we going to show up calm, or are we going to show up frantic? Are we going to show up angry and enraged, or are we going to show up as peaceful and together and confident, sending a message to people that, hey, you got this, or I got this, right? You are worthy of this. These are all things that can be done in very short amounts of time. Getting into a calmer feeling or a more relaxing feeling doesn't have to take much effort, but when we go through daily life, we're of course overwhelmed with electronics, with our news feed on social media, with the television news, with somebody that's having a bad day at work. Actually, it could be at home. If you work at home, it could be that a family member or a child is ill or just crabby, angry, upset, whatever the case may be. So how do you get yourself back into that feeling, grow with it, and expand it? And again, I invite all of us to think about the consequences to other people if you don't love yourself. Just think about that and the consequences. Again, we talked about this earlier in the broadcast. So how you show up in the world affects people. So what I want you to please consider doing is show up as your best self all the time. And that this is what I am here for. This is what I'm here to help you with. It's what I'm here to teach you with. So I really, truly, Cindy, I thank you very much. I know you're listening. And thank you so much for submitting this question. I know that this is pertinent to other people. And I talked about before the last commercial break what you can get out of this for submitting a question, not only the answers to your own question live on the air, but also the real deep satisfaction of knowing that your decision to stand up and ask has helped countless people all over the world. And the free session with Lisa and me. So, you want to consider that as well. So, Cindy, guys, my wife, is, I'm happy to announce, my very next special guest teacher on the show. Next week, she's going to be joining me. The topic is going to be health, wellness, and spirituality. Okay, health, wellness, and spirituality. So I want to give you a little bit of a preview of this show. Cindy owned a women's health club in McMinnville, Oregon for 21 years. And it's called it Cindy's Gym, and if you're listening from Oregon, you may know very well about that. McMinnville is a town outside of Portland, and there are nowadays about 35,000 people there. But what she did was very powerful, guys. She helped so many people that wouldn't have had a safe space to work on their own personal fitness, to have that space, and has been a yoga instructor. She's been a Pilates instructor, and modernly she is a wellness coach, a transformational wellness coach with a distinct focus on the spiritual aspect of health. It's more than just weight loss. It's more than strength training. It's much more than even just nutrition. And she will be with us on the show next week to share her unique insights. And she's very funny. And what I want to have you do is please, 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 if you've ever been considering writing into the show, write in with questions for Cindy. Now, she used to work with women only. She works with men and women, of course, now in the health and wellness field. So send your questions. It's tomas@tomasgarza.com. And definitely please consider doing that. That is our next guest teacher, and that's next week right here on the show. The date is February 11th, and I will point out that if you're ever unable to catch the live broadcast here on Om Times Radio, that within 24 hours it will be available not only as a replay here on Om Times Radio, it replays 3 times a week, and you can check the website omtimes.com, omtimesradio.com for details of that. Also, it is available worldwide wherever you listen to podcasts, whether that is Apple, Spotify, Spreaker, you name it. So definitely tune in. And if you can't catch next week's show live, then catch the replay. Okay. So what I want to do is spend a couple of minutes here just wrapping up. And let's just be really, really honest with ourselves here. Are you doing enough in your life to practice self-love? Are you? Only you would know. Are you doing enough to practice self-love in your life? And if you are not, what's standing in the way of your making a commitment to that? These are questions. You can consider them homework assignments, if you will. But answer honestly. Right? This is all about being honest with ourselves, because all of this is about how we show up in the world. Even if you consider yourself an introvert, as some of you may, even if you consider yourself a solitary person, we're still nevertheless interacting with people. Even if it's only over the telephone, even if it's online, we're still all interacting. Self-love has directly to do with how you show up in the world and what message you convey to people, how you teach them, in other words. Because I'm convinced that we're all teachers, whether we hold ourselves out as such or not. Why? Because we're all interrelating with each other. When you commit to a practice of loving yourself, you send a positive, uplifting, and empowering message. And it's not that you don't recognize the shadow side, right? That's all part of our work. We all have things that we need to look at and transform and change in our lives. We're all human beings, and we all have something, and if we've dealt with a lot of that, in the past to arrive at a more peaceful state presently. Wonderful. There's going to come up something else. Something else will arise in your experience, guaranteed, that's going to challenge you. And if you're committed to a practice of self-love, what's going to happen is you'll experience more resilience. You will find a way around it. You will find a way to transform, and it all relates to your making a decision about that. So I want to invite you to really examine this honestly and commit to loving yourself. If you're already committed, then redouble that commitment. Do more, because we can always do more. And not only do you deserve it, everyone else around you also deserves that. So, guys, you've been listening to Decide to Transform on Om Times Radio. Please be sure to join me next week for my wife, Cindy Garza, with Health, Wellness, and Spirituality. She may be back more than once because she's got a lot to say. So let me know with those questions. It's Tomas at tomasgarza.com. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's been an honor to be here with you and to serve you. We'll see you next week here on Om Times Radio. Have a great week, everybody.